General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Most people around the world remember Ronald Reagan as the 40th American president, and many people remember him as an actor turned politician and a former governor of California. But many people do not know his military background, nor his many accomplishments, including collapsing the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. That seemed to go unheralded during his 2 terms in office and are even little known today. Who was the real Ronald Reagan? What made him change parties from Democrat to Republican? How did he facilitate the end of the Cold War?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Ronald Reagan was born in very humble circumstances on February 6, 1911, in Tampico, Illinois. He attended Eureka College in Eureka, Illinois, where he played gridiron football and was active in the Drama Society, but earned only passing grades. A popular student, he was elected class president in his senior year and graduated in 1932 with a BA in Social Sciences and Economics, and then he moved to Iowa to become a radio sports announcer. A screen test in 1937 won him a contract in Hollywood, and over the next several decades, he rose to prominence as a film actor, appearing in 53 films. His fame as an actor before and during World War II in the U.S. Army Air Forces was both a benefit and a curse for Ronald Reagan, because he wanted to go overseas and serve like other celebrities, but fate would intervene. The Pentagon had Reagan continue to work in the film industry back home while in uniform. He appeared in patriotic films like Jap Zero and Forgotten Country, both produced in 1943, and doing 300 propaganda and training films. He left the service at war's end as a captain. In 1949, Ronald Reagan divorced his first wife, the actress Jane Wyman, and married Nancy Davis in 1952. After 6 years as president of the Screen Actors Guild, serving intermittently between 1947 and 1960, in 1962 Reagan switched his party affiliation from Democrat to Republican. His own personal views and philosophy did not coincide with the more radical movement of the majority of Democrats, who still supported racial segregation and tolerated the KKK, especially in the South. Reagan did not believe in cradle-to-grave welfare, as he believed that it killed the initiative of people to try and strive, work hard, and make their own lives better without the government. Reagan, the Republican, was elected governor of California on November 5, 1966, and then re-elected on November 5, 1970, serving until 1975. His next step was being elected as the 40th President of the United States in 1980. At the age of 69 in 1981, and age 73 in 1985, Reagan was at that time the oldest man ever elected president when he defeated Democratic incumbent James Earl Carter in the previous election with 50.7% of the votes. Reagan was not Carter. He was taken very seriously by world leaders, and one of the immediate results was the release of the 52 American hostages held in Iran for 444 days. Reagan warned the Ayatollah Khomeini that this was a new administration. Unlike the feckless Carter, he let the Iranians know that he would take action. The difference was demonstrable. Within hours of Reagan taking the oath of office, the hostages were in fact released. On March 30, 1981, 69 days after Reagan's inauguration on January 20th, John Hinckley Jr. attempted to assassinate the president outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. Reagan was shot under the left arm, the bullet lodging in his lung, and missed his heart by less than 1 inch. On August 3, 1981, 13,000 members of the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, or PATCO, walked off the job in a nationwide strike. 2 days later, Reagan announced that they were in violation of legislation prohibiting strikes by government employees because of public safety policies, and if they did not report to work within 48 hours, their jobs would be terminated. Only 1,300 returned to their jobs. The rest were, in fact, terminated, and the impact saw major strikes plummet from an average of 300 strikes each year in previous decades to fewer than 30 by 2006. While many labor leaders disliked Reagan, especially after he fired the air traffic controllers, he was very popular with labor union members for his protectionist approach to American workers keeping their jobs versus foreign labor. On August 19, 1981, Ronald Reagan fulfilled his campaign pledge to appoint the first woman to the Supreme Court by nominating Sandra Day O'Connor to replace Justice Potter Stewart. Congress confirmed O'Connor's appointment on September 21, 1981 by a vote of 99-0. Reagan was a national America First hawk, and he maintained a firm stance against terrorism, exemplified by the American retaliation against Libya for an air attack in 1981. He had put the world on notice. When Ronald Reagan took office, the U.S. economy had 9% inflation with 20% interest rates. To combat these effects, Reagan established what became to be known as Reaganomics, economic policies that included increased defense spending, lowering personal income taxes, reducing spending on social services, and decreased business regulation. He also tightened regulations on foreign workers' visas to protect American jobs. In the fall of 1981, due to the fiscal mismanagement of the previous administration, the cascade effect of liberal fiscal mismanagement finally caught up, and the U.S. economy took a turn for the worse. The Federal Reserve increased interest rates to combat the 14% inflation rate. By November 1982, unemployment reached 10.8%. Thousands of businesses failed, farmers lost their lands, and many sick, elderly, and poor became homeless. The official unemployment rate reached 11.5 million in January 1983, and Reagan's disapproval rating rose to 50%, from a low of only 18% in early 1981. Although inflation had dropped from 13.5% in 1980 to 5.1% in 1982, a severe recession set in, with unemployment exceeding 10% in October 1982 for the first time in 40 years. In response, Reagan lowered interest rates, passed legislation such as the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, which included the largest tax cuts in the post-World War II period, and later he passed the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982 and the Tax Reform Act of 1986. As a result, the top marginal tax rate on individual income was reduced from 70% to 28%, and the overall tax code was restructured. He signed the Free Trade Agreement with Canada, which evolved into the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. The economy began to rise as a result of consumer spending, and domestic revenues increased. In Beirut, Lebanon, October 23, 1983, a suicide bomber drove his truck into the U.S. Marine barracks, killing 241 Marines. This tragedy caused Reagan to reevaluate the placement of the Marines as a part of the multinational peacekeeping force during the Lebanese Civil War. Combined with previous and repetitive operations, Reagan's peacekeeping force was withdrawn from war-torn Lebanon. Reagan paid his respects to the families of those Marines at Camp Lejeune when the Beirut Memorial was built in 1986. Soon after his arrival, it started to rain very hard, and the crowd assembled, widows, siblings, comrades, family members, and children, but they were not under cover. Reagan was offered an umbrella by the Secret Service, but he stated, and was clearly overheard, "No, these people do not have one, so I do not need one." And he delivered a heartfelt speech to those in attendance. This was one of the many occasions when he made a very well-known remark, quote, "Some people wonder if they ever made a difference. Marines do not have that problem," end quote. Reagan led the battle for a Social Security reform bill designed to ensure the long-term solvency of the system and oversaw the passage of immigration reform legislation, as well as the expansion of the Medicare program to protect the elderly and disabled against catastrophic health costs. Reagan consistently received very high approval ratings. He was not popular with some minority groups, particularly African Americans, many of whom did not benefit from the economic prosperity. In 1986, over 30% of the black population had an income below the official poverty level, much of it due to the growth of technology-based employment. Reagan encouraged the development of private sector initiatives, as well as federalism, allowing the 10th Amendment to be unfettered by federal government, giving states far more flexibility with regard to business practices. The objective of transferring from the federal government some of the responsibilities to the states was believed to be a better served operation where private business was concerned at the state and local levels. On March 8, 1983, Reagan gave what became known as his Evil Empire speech that warned against ignoring the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, the USSR. On March 23rd, President Reagan announced the creation of the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, nicknamed Star Wars, which was a proposed space-based defense system intended to deter an attack on the U.S. by intercepting Soviet nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles. In actuality, Star Wars was a diversion operation to force the Soviets to spend money they did not have to counter the potential American advantage in space, which was not even a project. On October 25, 1983, 1,900 U.S. forces invaded the small island nation of Grenada over safety concerns for American medical students in the country and to remove a recent Cuban-inspired coup. Reagan had openly demonstrated his willingness to eliminate the spread of communism. The United Nations condemned the invasion, but widely supported by many Americans. The U.S. accomplished its military objectives in Grenada. The students came home unharmed, and the communist government was deposed. In 1984, Reagan won his second term by a landslide of 58.8% of the votes against Democratic challenger Walter Mondale, with Reagan receiving 525 electoral votes, the most of any presidential candidate, and winning every state except Minnesota. On April 15, 1986, to emphasize his position on terrorism, Reagan launched Operation El Dorado Canyon. This was a long-distance air raid to hit targets in Libya for the deaths of American soldiers in the La Belle discotheque in West Berlin. His target was Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi had earlier indicated that he would continue to support the active terrorist groups such as the West German Red Army faction, the Italian-based Red Brigades, and the Irish Republican Army. Still, foreign policy was his strong suit. Between November 19, 1985 and December 8, 1987, President Reagan met with Mikhail Gorbachev, Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, at 4 summits to discuss their respective countries' bilateral arms race. The meetings culminated in their December 8, 1987 signing of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which required the elimination of all intermediate-range ground-launched missiles. On November 25, 1986, Attorney General Edwin Meese publicly confirmed that $10 to $30 million of profits from the sale of U.S. arms to Iran had been diverted to the anti-communist guerrilla Nicaraguan Contras. National Security Advisor Admiral John Poindexter then resigned, and National Security Aide Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North was fired, both for their involvement in what became known as the Iran-Contra affair. Reagan claimed that he did not learn of the Iran-Contra diversion until Meese told him about it on November 4, 1986. In February 26, 1987, the Tower Commission's report found no evidence linking Reagan to the event. However, the report did determine that Reagan's hands-off policies among the government agencies led to the actions of his administration. On June 12, 1987, Reagan delivered a famous address in West Berlin at the Brandenburg Gate, which had separated communist East Berlin from democratic West Berlin since 1961. This was one of the many classic speeches he gave that earned him the nickname of the Great Communicator. He always spoke clearly, directly, and rarely used a script or deviated from his message. Whomever he spoke with never left the meeting not knowing his intentions or exactly where his mind was on any given subject. During his 2 terms in office, Reagan continually tried to balance the budget by cutting federal spending. He cut the budgets of many federal departments, including the Department of Housing and Urban Development by 40%, the Department of Transportation by 18%, the Department of Education by 19%, the Department of Commerce by 32%, and the Department of Agriculture by 24%. Reagan never cut the budgets for the Departments of Defense, Health and Human Services, Department of Justice, or Department of State. The penultimate result was that Reagan's foreign policies and economic reforms created a condition which the USSR could not match. The global economy was US dominated, and the Soviet system, trying to compete with the false flag operation called the Star Wars program, collapsed under the weight of its own imploding economy. His legacy was being tough. His position on terrorism, support of Israel, rebuilding the military, economic reforms that corrected Carter's failures, handling of the Soviet Union, and his stemming the growth of communism in the Western Hemisphere. However, his greatest achievement was in bluffing the Soviets into spending themselves into political and economic bankruptcy, collapsing their economy, their government, which resulted in the former Warsaw Pact nations also falling apart or becoming free and independent nations for the first time in their histories. Reagan's true legacy was that he had liberated nearly 100 million people alive today. In 1993, Reagan experienced recurring episodes of confusion and forgetfulness and was diagnosed as having Alzheimer's disease. He disclosed his condition in a November 5, 1994 letter to the American people, hoping to promote greater awareness of this condition. Ronald Reagan died on June 5, 2004 in Los Angeles, California.
Thanks for watching today's episode of Forgotten History. If you like this episode, please consider becoming a channel member or joining our Patreon page. This would help us offset the ever-increasing cost of production. As always, please like, share, and comment. And if you have any show ideas, please contact us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.